Hey guys, hopefully everyone's staying healthy and staying safe. To make sure that we don't fall too far behind in the content, I do want to do some work over the next 2 weeks, so I just want to make sure that everyone's with me when we come back from this extended quarantine or break. Then we'll not be too far behind and we'll be able to kind of pick it up from here. So the next unit that we're going to talk about is something called absolute values. And the curricular document, it states it like this: so demonstrate an understanding of the absolute value of real numbers. So what is an absolute value? Well, let's take a look at the definition. The absolute value of a number is simply the magnitude of the number. So for those of you that have taken physics before, you might recognize the word magnitude. That is, the absolute value eliminates the sign and makes everything positive. And it is denoted by two vertical parallel lines, so something like this. So like I was saying, those of you that might have taken physics before might recognize this word magnitude. In science and in math, what we find is that there's two types of numbers, or two types of information, right? When we talk about magnitude, what we're talking about is information that we don't care about the direction. We only care about the size. So when we talk about things like this in physics, the difference would be speed versus velocity, right? Where speed doesn't have a sign associated with it. If you're going 110 kilometers an hour on the highway, it's not positive or negative, it's just 110. Whereas velocity has a sign associated with it because we're not just talking about the speed, but we're also talking about the direction of the speed. So in that case, maybe going 110 kilometers east would be considered positive, and then going 110 kilometers per hour west would be considered negative. So that's when we start talking about signs. Well, this absolute value, or this idea of these two vertical brackets, what we do is we take this thing that has a sign, and we just look at its weight or its size. So negative 3 has a size of 3, and positive 5 has a size of 5. So when we take the absolute value of these things, all we really care about is the positive, or just how much that thing is worth. So for example, in general, the absolute value of a real number is defined as this, where this kind of weird looking bracket here is called a piecewise function. This thing right here that's described using this bracket, what this says is that a will be positive, or it will just take the value of a if a is greater than or equal to 0. So for example, if a were positive 5, then we're just going to keep that a value, right? But if a is less than 0, we're going to take the negative of a. So again, for example, if a is negative 3, then we're going to take the negative of negative 3, and that's going to give us 3. So that's how we describe these things using something called a piecewise function. So when doing operations, the absolute value is treated as a pair of brackets. So if we're talking about our BEDMAS, right, where we do brackets, then exponents, then division and multiplication, and addition and subtraction, absolute value brackets fall under this idea of brackets and BEDMAS as well. So when we're going through an operation, we're trying to do order of operations, we do our absolute value brackets at the same time we would do any other set of brackets. So for example, if I wanted to do this question right here, what we're going to do is we're going to perform the operation on the inside of this bracket first. So 2 minus 5 is negative 3. So that'd be step 1, is we would take that negative 3. Then we want to do the absolute value of negative 3. So when we do the absolute value of negative 3, what that does is it takes the negative 3 and turns it into positive 3. And now it would just be a matter of going through and doing our multiplication and our addition. So 3 times 3 is 9, and 2 plus 9 plus 1 is 12. Okay? So let's take a look at another example question. So really, it's simply put, these absolute value brackets just take any number, keep its value the same, but make it positive. So again, if we want to take a look at a question like this, where we have a bunch of real numbers and we want to order them from least to greatest, what we need to do in order to compare them is to make them all the same. So for example, we're going to apply all of these absolute value brackets and make everything positive that needs to be positive. And then what I would do is I would write everything as the same format. So if we want to write everything as a decimal, we can write it as a decimal. If we want to write it as fractions, we could write them all as fractions over the same denominator. In this case, it might be easier to write everything as a decimal. I know, I always say don't use decimals, but where this 12 over 5 and this 1/2 are terminating decimals, in this instance, it wouldn't be too bad. So let's do that. If we take negative 6 over 5 and we take the absolute value of that thing, we get positive 6.5. And then 5, and then the absolute value of 4.75 is still just positive 4.75. Okay, and negative 3.4, and then the absolute value of negative 12 over 5. So again, the absolute value of this negative number is going to leave us with a positive number. And then if we do 12 divided by 5, we get 2.4. Alright, the absolute value of negative 0.1 is positive 0.1. Then we have negative 0.01. And then finally, the absolute value of this negative number again gives us a positive number, and 2.5 is 2.5. So now let's compare our numbers and order them from least to greatest. So when we're talking about least, the first numbers we should be looking for are these negatives here, right? Negative 3.4, negative 0.01, and we want to order those first, starting with the one that is most negative. So our smallest number in this list is negative 3.4, and then after that comes the negative 0.01. Alright, now we're going to look at all of our positive numbers and just start working our way up the list. So of the numbers that are left, we have positive 0.1, positive 2.4, positive 2.5, and then 4.75, and 5, and finally 6.5. And that's how we would do this, right? We would just take all these absolute value brackets, turn them into positives, and then just compare our numbers. Okay? So here's another example of these types of questions. So again, let's take a look at these three operations, and let's solve them together. So, order of operations says we do brackets first. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to take this absolute value of 4, and we're going to turn it into positive 4. Minus, this minus sign that's there is still going to stay there because we haven't performed that operation yet. And then we look at the absolute value of negative 6. Well, the absolute value of negative 6 is positive 6. And then we do that final operation of 4 minus 6, which is negative 2. Okay? Let's look at question B now. So again, question B, what we're going to want to do is follow our order of operations. So step 1 says to do this bracket. So we're going to do the operation inside the bracket first. So the 5 minus and the 3 is still going to be there. Our absolute value sign is still going to be there, but we're going to take the answer to this bracket and do it. So 2 minus 7 is negative 5. Then we'll do our absolute value bracket. So 5 minus 3 times, and the absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5. So now we get 5 minus the answer to this multiplication, which is 15, and 5 minus 15 finally is negative 10. Alright, and finally, question C. So again, order of operations. We're just going to go through our entire equation, find any set of brackets that we can do, perform the operations inside of those brackets, and then just slowly make our way outwards from the inside. So the absolute value bracket that kind of surrounds this entire equation is just going to stay there for now because we're going to finish doing the inside first and then take the absolute value of our answer. So we do the negative 2, and then we're going to look inside. We're going to say, okay, so here's our first set of brackets, or the one that's most inside our equation. So we're going to say 5 minus 7 is negative 2. And we're going to square it, plus 6. Okay. And again, we're going to finish off the inside of our brackets before we actually do the absolute value. So what comes next in order of operations? After brackets, it is exponents. So the negative 2 doesn't get touched yet, and we're going to say negative 2 squared is positive 4. Now we're going to do multiplication. So negative 2 times 4, negative 8, plus 5. And then we do this operation. So negative 8 plus 5 is negative 3. And then finally, now that we've gotten the inside of our bracket to an answer, we're going to say the absolute value of negative 3 is positive 3. Okay, so at this point, what I'd like you guys to do is pause the video, try these 3 questions for me, and then once you think you have an answer, restart the video, and I'll go through the answers with you guys. Okay, so hopefully we were able to get to an answer here. So let's go through these together, and then you guys check your work at home, okay? So again, order of operations, absolute value of negative 4 minus the absolute value of negative 3. Oops, that's supposed to be a vertical bracket there, right? Not the rounded one. So again, go through, do your brackets first. So what is the absolute value of negative 4? Well, it's positive 4. And what is the absolute value of negative 3? It's positive 3. And then finally, 4 minus 3 is 1. All right, let's take a look at question B now. So again, absolute value brackets here, but we have to perform the operation inside first. So we're going to say negative 12 plus 8. When we do that operation, negative 12 plus 8, we get the absolute value of negative 4. And what is the absolute value of negative 4? Well, it's positive 4. All right, and lastly, question C. So again, we're going to take a look at our bracket, and we're going to go through order of operations. So first thing we need to do is this exponent. So we're going to say 12 times negative 3 plus 5 squared, which is 25. Then we do this multiplication. So 12 times negative 3 is negative 36 plus 25. And we do our addition. We get negative 11. And finally, we're going to do our absolute value brackets here, and we end up with an answer of positive 11. All right. If there's any questions on the video, I'm going to post a link on the Microsoft Teams. If anyone has any questions, be sure to you can either comment on the video, I suppose, or you can comment on Microsoft Teams. And if I can't answer the question in writing, if that seems something difficult, I might just make a second video to answer any questions there are for the first one, okay? And what we find is that absolute value, because, like I said, it's very much physics and that kind of thing, there are a lot of real-world applications to these things. A lot of the times when we're doing real-world questions, we don't necessarily care if something is going up or down or left or right. Sometimes all we care about is just how much it's moving by. And this would be an example of those types of questions. So on stock markets, individual stocks and bond values fluctuate a great deal, especially when the markets are volatile, right? So right now, this is a perfect example of what we're seeing. The markets are really volatile with everything going on globally. So if anyone is investing, what we found right now is people are losing a lot of money in the stock markets because the world is really uncertain about what's going to happen next, right? So this is a great example. A particular stock on the Toronto Stock Exchange opened the month at $13.55 per share, dropped to $12.70, increased to $14.05, and closed the month at $13.85. Determine the total change in value of this stock for the month. Now, why do we care about the total change? We don't necessarily... Well, we do care the fact that the stock started at $13.55 and ended at $13.85. So the net change of the stock was 30 cents positive, right? So the stock went up, so anyone who had invested in the stock would gain a little bit of value, and that'd be great. But what we have to be careful of is if we're investing in stocks or if we're taking a look at the stock market, just knowing the net change is not enough. Sometimes if a stock changes a lot over the course of the month, we consider that stock to be pretty volatile. And the problem with volatile stocks is depending on how the market's going, they can be a very high-risk stock. So what we're going to want to do is make sure that this stock is a good investment by looking at how volatile it is. And the way that we're going to figure out how volatile it is every time the stock changes value, we're going to figure out how much it changed by and then just add those numbers together. So what I mean by that is we care about the fact that the stock changed price, so $13.55 and $12.70, right? So what we're going to want to do is say, okay, well, how much did it change by? So $13.55 take away 12.70, right? And what that'll tell us, it'll tell us how much money, not necessarily the stock gained or lost or value. What it'll tell us is how much it changed by. Since we don't care about whether it went up or down, all we care about is how volatile the stock is. What we want to look at is the magnitude of that change. We don't necessarily care if it dropped by that many cents or went up by that many cents. What we care about is the fact that it changed at all. So we're going to take a look at the absolute value of that. Then we want to do the same thing for the next price change, and so on until we have the total change in the stock's worth. So our next numbers here are 1270 and 1405. So the absolute value of 12.70 minus 14.05. And then the final price change was 1405 and 13.85. So plus the absolute value of 14.05 minus 13.85. And again, what this is going to tell me, it's not going to tell me if the stock gained a lot of money or lost a lot of money over the course of the month. All it's going to tell me is that the stock changed in value. And how much did it change? Is it a safe stock? Is it a volatile stock? Is there high risk, low risk? Right? So that's what we're going to figure out now. So then let's do these three subtractions. And then once we have their answers, we're going to take their absolute values and add those three numbers together to figure out how volatile this stock ends up being. So if we started at 1355 and we're going down to 1270, that would be a drop of 0.85. Okay. Plus from 1270 up to 14.05, that's a gain of 13. So but we're subtracting here, so negative 13 negative 1.35. And then finally, we do this subtraction here. 1405 and 13.85 is a change of 0.20. 0.20. Okay, and then because we're looking at magnitude, what we're going to do is we're going to take these three numbers and we're going to find their absolute value. So the absolute value of 0.85 is 0.85. The absolute value of negative 1.35 is 1.35. And the absolute value of 0.20 is 0.20. So what this is saying is in each interval the stock changed by 85 cents and then $1.35 and then 20 cents. So altogether over the course of the month, if we add these three numbers up, will tell us how volatile the stock was because it'll tell us how much it changed. 0.85 plus 1.35 is 2.20, and then plus another 0.2 is 2.40. Now, I can't speak to the volatility of a stock because I'm not that familiar with it, but I would imagine a stock that changes that frequently would be considered fairly volatile. So we'd have to be careful if we're investing in a stock like this because it can very much be dependent on the way the world is going about how the stock is going to change. And if you're young and you have the time to invest and not have to worry about it right now, these types of stocks might be okay because over the long span, they will generally increase in value. So if it changes a lot now, eventually the stock will start returning. But if you're getting to the point where you're almost finished with your investing and you want to start drawing on that money, we have to be careful because if we invested in a stock and that stock lost a lot of money, then we'd be in a serious issue. Okay? Alright, so let's keep going here. So right here we have a couple practice questions. So again, if you guys want to, you can stop the video right now and try some of these questions for yourself. What I'll do is if you guys want to restart the video at a later time or pause and walk away and come back to it, I will go over some answers here. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly, not as in-depthly as the practice questions we did earlier. But I will go through some of the answers. So if you guys want to pause the video here, try some of these questions, and then when you come back, we can look at the answers together. Okay? Okay, so hopefully some of you guys tried the questions and were able to get to some answers. So let's go through the answers now. So I did them ahead of time, and again, if anyone has any questions about how I did anything, just make sure that you get a hold of me either through Teams or on this video, and I can hopefully answer some of those questions for you guys. So let's take a look at question number 1 here. So question number 1 was simply just evaluate these expressions, right? So if I gave you the absolute value of 8 minus 15, then you should have these answers here. So again, what's happening here, you get negative 7, then do the absolute value is positive 7. This one you get positive 10, you do the absolute value, it leaves you with positive 10. Here we take the absolute value separately, but then when we end up subtracting, we end up with a negative answer because this is positive 3 and positive 8, and 3 minus 8 is negative 5. And finally, this one, again, same idea, so we're doing the absolute value after we get our answer, so we should end up with a positive. Okay? Question number 2, same idea, they're just a little bit bigger, right? This time we're adding in multiple expressions, multiple operations, and absolute value brackets. And the questions kind of get progressively bigger and bigger and bigger. But again, here's your answers. So when we do this one, we do the answer to the inside, we take its absolute value, and then we multiply that by 2, and we get 10. And so on and so forth. So again, if you guys have any questions, make sure just to get a hold of me somehow. I can go through these questions more in depth if anybody needs me to. But again, this is the idea. So we're just going to follow it just like we would any other order of operations. The only difference here is these new vertical brackets that make things positive. Alright, and the third question, the word problem. So, the Yukon Quest dog sled race runs between Fairbanks, Alaska and Whitehorse, Yukon Territory, a distance of more than 1,000 miles. It lasts for 2 weeks. The elevation of Fairbanks is 440 feet, so that's this one down here. Right here's Fairbanks down here. And the elevation of Whitehorse is 2,089, so that's this one here. So question A, determine the net change in elevation. And this probably would have been the first time some of you might see the idea of net change in relation to a math class. So be careful. When you see the word net, they are actually looking for a sign. Is it a higher elevation? Is it a lower elevation? So we want to know, does the elevation go up or does the elevation go down? So for question A, we actually don't want absolute value brackets. We want to actually find the total answer. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the elevation of Whitehorse, which is 2,089, and from it we're going to subtract the elevation of Fairbanks, which is 440. And in this case, if we got a negative answer, that's fine. Our answer could be negative. All that means is that the elevation of Whitehorse is lower than the elevation of Fairbanks. But it didn't really make a difference in this question because it was a positive answer. But just be aware that if a question is asking you for net change, I do actually want the sign involved with that. Did it go up? Did it go down? Now, part B, the race passes through Central, an elevation of 935 feet, Circle City, whose elevation is 597 feet, and Dawson City at an elevation of 1,050 feet. What is the total change in elevation from Fairbanks to Whitehorse passing through these cities? So again, it wants the total change. It doesn't care if the change is up or down. All it cares about is how much did the elevation change over the course of the race. So in this case, because we don't really care about the sign, whether the elevation goes up or the elevation goes down, we just care about the change, then we're dealing with absolute value brackets. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the elevation at Fairbanks, and from it we're going to subtract the elevation at Central. So then we find the total elevation that it changed by here. And then we'll do Central to Circle City. Now in this case, Circle City has a lower elevation, so we would end up with a negative change to our elevation. But again, because we only care about how much it changes by, we don't necessarily care that it's negative, so we're going to keep the absolute value brackets there. And then from Circle City to Dawson City, and then finally from Dawson City to Whitehorse. And what happens is if we look at the 4 calculations here and we add them up, we end up with a total change, not a net change, but a total change of 2,325 feet. Okay, so hopefully that was clear and you guys understood how absolute brackets work. Expect a video probably someday this week about absolute value equations and kind of taking a deeper dive or a closer look at absolute value brackets. And what I'll probably do is post these notes as well on Teams as a PDF, and I'll have a couple of worksheets and assignments and things like that for you guys to work on. Don't worry, while you're out, I won't have anything that's going to be worth marks. I won't post quizzes, I won't post tests, anything like that. These next 2 weeks are just going to be for you guys to focus on making sure that you don't fall too far behind in content. And then when we get back to class, we'll talk about what we're going to do about summative work, like quizzes and tests and things like that. All right, so you guys have a great rest of your day, and hopefully I'll be seeing you in the near future.